He says, for the past few months, I've started treating my music career like a project with a timeline instead of an emotion with no calendar. I do things like schedule time every week for writing instead of waiting for inspiration. Beautiful. And let me add here, when you're scheduling time to write and you write, it doesn't have to be great. Just get it out there, because it might be, you might spend all night working on one line and be like, well, that was a waste of a night. But then a month later, you'll come back to it, or you'll need that line, and then instantly things will just take off from that one night that you didn't really see any progress. He says, I set release deadlines and stick to them no matter what. Perfect. He goes, I plan social, promo, show routes weeks ahead instead of randomly posting when I feel like it. I mean, all that stuff is available for you to schedule, so you don't have to just like randomly do it. You can come up with a consistent plan. He said, break big goals into weekly small actions and I can actually finish. This is awesome, my guy. He said, the funny thing is, nothing magical happened overnight. I didn't suddenly get signed or blow up on Spotify, but everything feels more real. I see a gradual, sudden shift happening. I've been saying slow and steady wins the race for 12 years. He says, I'm shipping music, I'm finishing projects, and most importantly, I'm building momentum instead of spinning in circles. Because what you're doing is you're actually becoming the master of your destiny instead of just like letting the currents and the wind and the weather and everything else dictate where you're going. You're like, I'm committed to doing this. It's one of those mindsets you have to have as an artist. If you're going to take the island, you burn the boats. Like there's no turning back. And so many artists, we read these emails. I get the emails that we don't even respond to because they're just so stupid. They're not going to do anything unless they can get a guarantee it's going to be worth their time. Nothing in life is a guarantee besides death and taxes. He says this shift mattered more than any single opportunity ever did. Right, because you weren't waiting for anything to happen. You went and created something for you. You know, it's most artists want to wait for the phone to ring, and it never does. And then they're like, well, I tried. I did everything I could. You know how many times over the last 25 years being in this industry, you would talk to an artist and they say, I've done everything. And then you ask them what they've done, and they're like, well, I've done 3 things. Because, you know, they'll be, I've done everything. And you're like, everything? And they're like, well, I've done 100 things. I'm like, 100 things? And they're like, okay, I did like 3 things. And they gave up. He says, so now I'm trying to think about music as something that requires management, not just passion. I used to think passion was the hardest part. Now I realize it's the consistency and structure that makes passion matter. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. He says, I'm curious what you think about this idea of treating music like a real operation. I always talk about you got to have that beautiful balance of the art and the business. And until you get somebody to take over the business, you got to do both. And that means being consistent, building that fan base, building those personal emotional connections with people, being visible, reaching out to people, cold calling, being rejected. You're going to send DMs to people that follow your account. They're never going to respond. So what? You move on. You worry about the people who do respond. He says, a lot of artists talk about inspiration and emotion, but not as many talk about the discipline that has to underlie everything that it follows. Well, no, they don't talk about discipline because they don't have discipline. Why do you, I mean, how you gonna preach about discipline, but you are a drunk or you're addicted to, you know, narcotics, or you don't pick up your instrument and play every day?